in your book, you talk about a particular approach to teaching and learning that's become very popular recently, that is the kind of direct instruction of a knowledge-rich curriculum. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that this approach has some very influential supporters, such as Michael Gove, the former Education Secretary, people like Tom Bennett, the founder of Research Ed, Daisy Christodoulou, to name but a few. And what has surprised me, certainly, is the certainty with which some of these figures talk and write about education as though all of the evidence is on their side and it's case closed. So if we start with something like direct instruction, a lot of the evidence comes from cognitive science and models of working and long-term memory. Now, in a vlog very similar to this one that I did with Professor Dylan William a couple of years ago, he said, the point that should guide the whole of education is the fact that working memory is limited. Now, as a cognitive scientist yourself, is this correct? Is direct instruction the best way to teach children? And should we all brush up on the latest cognitive science and adjust our teaching accordingly?
Well, this is the nub of the book, really, and it would take me more than 5 minutes to try and unpick all the things that you're talking about. I think that the drawing on the cognitive science is extremely well motivated. I mean, one of the problems, endemic problems for teachers and for educators, is that we often feel a little insecure about our knowledge base. It's complicated, it's various, and we often feel like rather unsure, and I've talked to enough teachers to know that this is pretty general. Mm-hmm. a kind of ungrounded. So the search for some kind of solid grounding is admirable and useful, but the trouble is it then also makes you vulnerable to people who try and flog a particular version of that scientific bit. It makes you open, it makes you what's the word I'm looking for? Gullible. Mm-hmm. For all the best possible reasons, for someone who comes along and professes certainty, who professes that 50 years ago the fundamental cognitive architecture of the mind was discovered, mm-hmm. and nothing of any real interest has happened since Atkinson and Shiffrin's 1967 paper on short-term and long-term memory, or the updated version from Baddeley and Hitch in 1974. And that is simply not true. Mm-hmm. The whole emphasis on working memory, out of which comes the emphasis on cognitive load, rests on a particular image or a particular metaphor, which draws strongly on computer metaphor. Cognitive psychology was powerfully influenced by the metaphor of the digital computer, right, back in the 1960s and 1970s. And you can open up a computer and you can see something that bits that corresponds to something like working memory. The central processor or RAM are conflated in the idea of working memory. And then you have something else which is physically separate, called the hard drive, which corresponds to long-term memory. Mm-hmm. It's a metaphor. Indeed, even the idea of memory as a store is a metaphor. It's like a place where things get put and someone or something puts them there and then takes them out of there and then takes them somewhere else and works on them. Even back in the 1970s, one of the founding fathers of cognitive psychology, a man called Ulrich Neisser, who was very influential when I was doing my undergraduate and graduate studies, was parodying that approach using a term that I like and still use. He called it boxology, where you just draw boxes with arrows in between them and assume that somehow or other you've identified this. Now here comes another metaphor, cognitive architecture. Right. What do you think of when you think of architecture? You think of the Acropolis, don't you? Mm. You think of some solid, lasting, structural, unvarying, solid thing that determines everything that's going on in and around it. But for the last, this is to cut a very long story short, but for the last 20 or 30 years, even Alan Baddeley, one of the godfathers of this view of the working memory concept, even his own personal intellectual autobiography he called Working Memory, because that's what his life has been about. It's been about working on memory. Now acknowledges that there are quite different ways of thinking about this. For example, that working memory isn't a place or a structure with a bottleneck. It's a particular kind of activity that goes on within the long-term memory of the brain. I mean, all there is in the brain, there aren't any boxes. You open up someone's, don't see any boxes, and there aren't any boxes. There's an incredibly complex mass of neural tissue, which is able to control its own activity by deploying, in very sophisticated ways, patterns of electrical, electrochemical excitation and inhibition. It's like having an accelerator and a brake that you can apply to different bits of your brain. And that's how we keep ourselves on track, by, as it were, creating excitatory centers of activity surrounded by inhibitory stockades of other kinds of activity, which determine what's relevant, what's not relevant, and which enable you to stay on purpose. That's a very, very different model of working memory. And it doesn't imply, as Dylan said in that interview with you, I think he's mistaken about this, it doesn't imply that we have to pay attention to this hypothetical bottleneck, this sort of narrow vestibule through which everything has to squeeze itself before it can get into long-term memory. Alan Baddeley's model of memory is now much more complicated, and he has been obliged by the experimental evidence to add several other boxes, one of which is what he calls the episodic buffer, which enables new information to talk directly to long-term memory without going through anything like working memory. In fact, working memory phenomena only appear under rather peculiar conditions, which largely are when either you're required to remember something literally. In other words, you can't digest it. You have to retain it in an undigested form, or the knowledge that you're acquiring, it doesn't make any immediate or obvious contact with the vast neural mass of impressions and information. If it's sort of completely de novo, then you may have to kind of hold things in mind, like you do with the archetypal telephone number. You're processing these things. But in an ordinary history lesson or geography lesson or English lesson or PE lesson, these constraints rarely apply. And even in maths and science lessons, both maths and science, there's very interesting work in cognitive science on this at the moment, both maths and science are built on metaphorical foundations, which draw on everyday experiences in order to give us a handle on these novel and abstract domains. So the idea that somehow or other, particularly scientific and mathematic problem solving is something completely new and different is not well founded. There's a wonderful book called Where Mathematics Comes From, which is about these underlying metaphors of how we're positioned in space, and up and down and larger and smaller and nearer and farther, things that are very embedded in our concrete experience. So all of this, as it were, sweeps away the Parthenon, the Acropolis view of the mind, or at least says there are highly credible alternatives to that view, which we need to bear in mind, and which are much more likely to be brain friendly, to be accurate in terms of the neurophysiology than the idea of the boxes.
Fascinating. And also what's interesting is we're learning more, aren't we, all the time? So
absolutely.
We can never be certain.
Some of these people would have you, and I poke a bit of fun at this in the book, would have you agree that nothing of any significance has happened since 1967. And I know that cognitive psychology, cognitive science has changed massively since I was an undergraduate in 1968. When the Atkinson and Shiffrin model was all the rage.
Yeah.
But it isn't anymore, I'm afraid. It's a bit old hat.